Bam! What is going on, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chimman, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. If you guys have not signed up for my emails yet, please do so. Go to masterchimman.com, sign up. It's free. You get a promo code for a free program just for doing that. All the information's on the website. The links are in the description. Some of you guys are watching on YouTube. Some of you guys are watching on Facebook. Some of you guys are watching on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter. You could also get my new shirt design. That link is in the description as well. Mortem Tyrannis. Death to Tyrants. That's the topic for today. Before I get into it, let me say what's up to everybody here. Reinar says, been subscribed for a while, but I don't really watch. I'll be damned if that thumbnail doesn't have my interest peaked. I appreciate it. Jesse, what's up? Big Joe, what's up? Jamie, my man up in Canada. Johnny Groove, Cherrytown Vibe, what's going on? All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about tyrants and what the outcome. Big Fred in the house. What up? Round two. Yarn Saxa, hello to you. All right, good. Got a good group. We're going to talk about tyrants, and we're going to talk about formulaically how we should be dealing with them. Obviously, you know, a little spoiler alert as to my prescription for the type of end that tyrants should meet, but even that has a functional purpose. The reason why functional purposes is so important, and when I'm in how and why I design my formulas and my protocols, I have a tendency, being a recovering tyrant myself, to become very impassioned in looking to make things the way that I think they should be. Left to my own devices and without the discipline that I've spent the better part of 30 years at this point trying to build, I will tend to opt for the actions that make me feel the best. And they absolutely may not very well be the things that put me in the best situation. So we want to have formulas and protocols when dealing with the consistent, cyclical type of dynamics and variables that we encounter during our regular lives. Tyrants are amongst those commonalities. Dealing with tyrants is going to be a recurring theme in your life. Some of us, in order to do what is necessary, we are deficient where our understanding and or our discipline prepares us in getting these responsibilities done. Meaning, what needs to be done transcends what an individual's capabilities may be. And oftentimes, the tool that is used to bridge the gap between what they're capable of and what needs to be done is emotion. You'll have people who need to be really, really angry before they fight. They need to be really, really sad before they leave somebody. There needs to be some sort of emotional bridge between where they're at and where they need to be in order to do the job that they've often committed themselves to do. When dealing with tyrants, it is the same variables at play. If you do not understand what a tyrant is, it's going to be hard for you to identify a tyrant early on in them looking to tyrannize you. Oftentimes people, because of social devices and their inability to deal with conflict, their conflict aversion, because of these different deficiencies that people have, they oftentimes empower and embolden would-be tyrants to become just that. So there is, I would say, a moral obligation for an individual to sort of preemptively disarm one's transformation into the role of a tyrant. Tyrants do not often meet very good ends. Being that that's the case, you are actually helping allies if we prevent them from becoming a tyrant in the first place. So that's another argument for understanding what these variables are. Let's start getting enough let's start getting a definition, rather, a definition of what a tyrant is, and we could start building from there. So starting off, a tyrant is an individual who looks to pursue their own mission, oftentimes at the expense of the people that they are connected to. A tyrant sees people as tools to be utilized in the pursuit of their own mission. A tyrant expects allies or followers. If that tyrant has ascended to a leadership role, the tyrant expects those followers, those that are led, to ignore their own identities and to exist solely in the commonality between them and the tyrant's mission. If I am a tyrannical boss, I don't want to hear my employees talk about anything that exists outside of the workplace. I don't want to hear about their obligations as a father, as a husband, as a participant in any other set of alliances that exist outside of the work relationship, if I am a tyrannical boss. So the tyrant does not empathize with an individual's offset. A tyrant merely looks at an individual as the tool that they're going to leverage and utilize to pursue their own individual mission. So when you are dealing with a tyrant, first and foremost, you have to understand that who you are does not have a seat at the table in the tyrant's mind when looking to sort of weigh the value and significance of you and your individual plight in life. When you are dealing with a tyrant, you don't matter outside of how you matter to the tyrant specifically, right? So it's not that you don't matter at all, which a lot of times when somebody has not done the work necessary to develop who they are on an individual basis, they succumb to the allure of tyranny, because there is a certain validation from the tyrant to the one being tyrannized through that feedback based on compliance. If you have, and I've spoken about this before, one of the most dangerous things you could have is a tyrant with an army of rule followers. The rule followers being the individuals whose only virtue is the feedback that comes by way of a currency of compliance. A rule follower complies, he gets that feedback, recognizing that compliance, and that is how he individually is validated. So the rule follower is an archetype of an individual that will actually agree to exist in the overlap with the tyrant. They will empower the tyrant. They will volunteer for the army of the tyrant, because in that compliance is where they get their fulfillment. And a tyrant is all too willing to give that, maybe not even identifying it as some sort of positive feedback for the follower to begin with, the rule follower to begin with, but the tyrant just in a normal feedback of, did you do what I said to do? Yes. All right. That's what I said to do. You did it. Like, mission accomplished. That's all the feedback the rule follower needs. There's something to be said for understanding who you are and what your mission is, because it gives an individual an anchor to not become sort of almost brainwashed into these ecosystems of feedback that will have an individual lose who he is. If you are not anchored to who you are and the integrity of you as an individual is not firmly established, how do you think you are going to manage the stressors and the friction of dealing with the world that is out to pursue their own interests? That's what winds up happening. You have individuals who come into contact with tyrants. These individuals themselves haven't fully developed or appreciated who they are as individuals. They don't know how to say no. They want to say who they are. Maybe they've done the work necessary to say who they are, but they haven't yet put who they are up against enough conflict and enough sort of opposition to then evolve to the point where they could also say who they are not. I like this. Or what about this? Okay. They'll say who they are, but they will never say who they are not, because they understand that that puts them on the opposite side of people. And because they are so conflict averse, because they have not built the integrity of who they are, they cannot stand that conflict. Who they are will not survive the friction, the normal everyday friction of just being on the other side of a position with other people. They want to get along with everybody. If there's two parties that are in opposition, the person who has not done the work necessary to develop who they are, they will go to the majority side, because they see that that is the safest. The potential for them being attacked individually is at its lowest when they are with the majority. We're seeing that now in society, aren't we? We're seeing a government, which is a centralization of authority, which can never be a good thing. How big should the government be? No bigger than necessary. Well, what does that mean? We don't know. It's going to evolve over time, so let's make sure it's as small as possible. Better a government slightly too small than a government slightly too big. It's my belief. Why? Because centralization is bad. It is evil. It is the vehicle by which evil organizes. Centralization is the vehicle by which evil organizes. We have to understand the very act of centralization is the negation of the individual components that is being centralized. We are being reduced to our commonality. You'll see this in language a lot. You have the Black community, the gay community, the disabled community. The idea of this community existing is completely a construct of language. These are individuals that may very well share common plights, common interests, but that does not reduce them to those commonalities. But when we start reducing people to this community and that community, that is exactly what happens. It is a form of centralization that ignores the offset of the individual. I've spent my life trying to make sure I cannot be reduced to a box. I remember there's some irony in a friend of mine, a former friend of mine, he's not a friend of mine anymore, giving me basically a shout out, one of his books. And in the book, the shout out that he gave me was, he referred to me something like his MMA friend. The irony, of course, being that I wanted to MMA assault him when I read that. Because in all the interactions that he and I had, which contributed any value in any way to the book that he wound up writing, MMA had nothing to do with it. But that was the box he wanted me to be placed in. So I understand that for some people, it is natural to find your groups. We are programmed to find patterns, to discover patterns. It would only make sense then we look for patterns of people that overlap with the patterns that we want to pursue as individuals. These things make sense. However, if we do not pay attention to develop enough the relationship we have with ourselves at an individual scale, then we will have groups convince us of who we are, even though that little voice in our head is telling us otherwise. Let me see some more questions here. Cherrytown Vibes, can you give an example of what the root causes can be for creating a tyrant? So creating a tyrant think of it in terms of conditioning, right? And this is you can look at the quadrants of operant conditioning. Like this is, animal behavior 101. How does anybody become incentivized to do something over another? Well, they're rewarded for one behavior, they're punished for another. A tyrant is somebody who has been rewarded. In other words, the formulas succeed when you are a tyrant, when you ignore the integrity of the individuals that you are influencing. Somebody could act in a tyrannical manner and in an almost free shaping sort of process, be incentivized to continue doing that. When you do free shaping work with a dog, right, in dog training, if you want to teach a dog to sit, easy example, you basically wait until the dog sits on his own, and then you reward him for it. And he goes, what the fuck was that? I just got a treat. What did I do? And then you will actually see the dog's brain start to work and try and figure out what prompted that reward. And when they discover it was that sitting position again, there's a connection that they made, a pattern that they're unveiling. And then what you'll often see with dogs who have gone through this process is, especially with puppies that are just, fresh out of training, they will start to demonstrate these positions thinking, and like, which one is giving me the treat? Which one gets me the treat? Similarly, any behavior, becoming a tyrant, included in this behavior or these types of behaviors, when it is incentivized and rewarded, when you succeed by doing that thing in that way, then the tendency is to continue to do that. That becomes a formula that you are running. It is not until another formula presents itself as being more effective, or the formula they have proves to be damaging or destructive or painful, you are punished. It is not until one of those criteria comes about that the behavior is no longer incentivized. I remember it's over 10 years at this point, I believe. I designed a shirt that said, "Never apologize for being a man." I've been talking about this stuff for a while. When I wrote when I designed the shirt or wrote that quote, "Never apologize for being a man," the thought process behind it was, you are a man and everybody should accept you as being many things, amongst them a man. And if there is any component of who you are that offends or triggers anybody around you, that is not your issue. You do yourself a disservice to sacrifice a piece of who you are just to build a connection with somebody who doesn't have your best interests at heart to begin with. Why do I have to be less of me so I can get along with somebody who is not looking out for my success at all? It doesn't make any sense. So way back when I started making shirts saying "Never apologize for being a man," it was this idea of how could you ignore a component of who you are? When we start talking about tyrants, how do tyrants become formed? Because people are too willing to ignore who they are. They're too willing to concede. It's the go along to get along mindset. It's the what's the big deal philosophy. We have to understand that when you apologize once, you will apologize as many times as necessary. There's an idea of being non-compliant. Being non-compliant means you are not going to sacrifice in any way your individual beliefs for the continued approval of another identity. If I'm in the middle of an intersection, it's 2 a.m, and I'm in some small town, there's absolutely nobody there, and it's a red light, I'm driving through the red light. That's what I'm doing. But when there's a red light, during the day, do I somehow change my philosophy? Well, no, it's the same philosophy, but what's not being considered is the specificity at which my philosophy is designed. I always stop at red lights. Well, no, that's a pretty general statement. There's a lot of nuance. What kind of red lights? Would you be stopping at a red light if you saw a Mack truck, who's lost control, steaming towards you at 100 miles an hour? Would you stop at a red light if you saw that, there was lava coming down from a mountainside beside you and you had to get out? Like, obviously, it's not we are always going to stop at red lights, always, never. These ideas are called universal quantifiers. We're not powerful enough to be able to wield them effectively and consistently. So when we use these terms like always and never, we have to say it for what it is, or like we're being hyperbolic, where we're exaggerating, where we're adding energy to something when we use these terms. But there is not a literal description of what we're trying to convey when we use these terms, always and never. That doesn't work. So that being said, there are going to be times where If I get pulled over by a police officer and it's a 120-pound woman who's got a chip on her shoulder and, all sorts of insecurities, and she's being a little over the top with me, I'm going to comply with her. But why am I going to comply in that situation? Because the compliance is not with her. The compliance is in all of the outcomes, the second, third order effects of the decisions I'm going to make while interacting with her. But I understand who I am in this situation. And certainly, whether it be the 130-pound female officer or the 250-pound, officer, like whoever it is, there is a line where they're going to say to do something and I'm going to say no, because I exist while this interaction is occurring. At no point do I just ignore who I am. No, I have enough of an understanding that I understand the consequences of the decisions that I'm making. But I never lose my identity in that process. You see, when we're dealing with tyrants, there's a tendency of, if I just go along, all the friction seems to go away. But it's almost like being led to slaughter. It's like there is an ultimate consequence that you are going to pay. You are just sort of kicking the can, moving the goalpost. You're looking at a point in a timeline that doesn't really address all of the things that you're designing. It's that great speech in the movie Braveheart where, the William Wallace character is telling everybody, sure, you can go home now. You don't have to fight this. You don't have to stand up to these guys in this battlefield. And you might live another couple of decades. But when you're on your deathbed, I want you to ask yourself, would you be willing to come back here and make a different decision? And obviously that resonated with the people that were listening to him in the movie. The historicity of it is another conversation. But the whole idea, the sentiment of it is, when we make a decision, maintaining the integrity of who we are in the present moment that we're residing, we can be consistent in honoring and staying loyal to who we are as an individual. So when we see a tyrant operating in a way that completely ignores the offset of the people they're coming into contact with, you have to understand they are running a formula that is successful because of all of the interactions they've had up until that point. When the pandemic hit a few years ago and the government said I had to close my school, I had a conversation with my students. I said, I'm not closing. So the government's going to try, and the government doesn't give a fuck about us, doesn't give a fuck about our families, doesn't give a fuck about any of the positivity that comes out of this training environment for all the participants in it. The government's not paying attention to that offset, which is why the government was being tyrannical. It's because the government wanted to do what it wanted to do, and it wasn't consistent. It wasn't based on any sort of standard of logic or science or even legality that people were willing to abide by. No, they just went along because they didn't know how to not go along with the government. They thought that non-compliance represented a consequence. They weren't sure they'd be able to survive. So what do? They began to champion the culture of compliance. They became the champions of rule followers. Here's the thing. If every tyrant, let me be a little less over the top. If every tyrannical formula met its end in a way that it no longer became a viable way of getting a mission accomplished, then there would be lesser the choice that would-be tyrants made in their pursuit of their desired outcomes. Let me say that another way. The only reason tyrants are tyrants is because tyranny works. And it works in that it gives them the outcome they want. If being a tyrant no longer gave them the outcome they wanted, there would be no drive to become a tyrant at the scale that we're seeing. Years ago, I've said it, and I'm certainly not the first one to ever say this, but I shared this, many, many times, that every man should have something more important to him than death. If you, as a man, do not have anything to you that is more important to you than death, more important to you than living, I should say, in the face of death, then you will always opt to survive an interaction. The irony, of course, being you eventually will die just like everybody else. So when the ultimate aversion that a man has is the threat of his life, he'll always be controlled by the person who most convincingly threatens the life. If you're so scared, like, think about, there are people, I grew up in the Bronx, right? And where I grew up wasn't the nicest of neighborhoods, wasn't the roughest either, full disclosure, but we had our share of shit. And we always knew that, like, there would be people who would be robbed because they were so soft that they would get robbed, and somebody didn't even have to, like, brandish a weapon. Someone didn't have to physically assault them or anything. Like, they would just be able to come up aggressively enough and demand that person give them their stuff, and these people would comply. It's a dysfunctional level of fragility in an environment like the one I grew up in. I'm the type, it's never happened to me, but if I would have ever been robbed and somebody did the whole, finger in the jacket pocket thing, give me your stuff. I mean, I would have to say, listen, I'm about giving you my stuff. Like, I'm not opposed to that, but I got to see the gun. You got to show me the gun. I can't just give you this because you're making, like, it might be a finger. Just show me it's your gun and I'll give you everything. Like, I can't walk away saying I didn't know if it was actually a gun. And there are people who are going to say, well, that's ridiculous. What does it matter? What does it matter? What if it is a gun? And that's all he needed to it's like, all right, okay, you're right. Show me the formula that's going to make me live forever. All I know is that I would not feel very comfortable with who I was as a person if I could just be threatened enough to comply in situations like that, because the consequence wasn't real enough, because I know who I am. I remember one time I got jumped in Eden Wall Projects. I've spoken about this before. I've only been jumped once in my life, but it was a doozy. Not as bad as it could have been by any means, but it was a rough go. And I got jumped in Eden Wall Projects. I was in 8th grade, so I was about 13 years old, and 5-6 kids jumped me. And I remember the whole time I'm getting jumped, and I'm like turtled up, I'm getting kicked, punched, and everything. I'm talking shit to everybody. Fuck you guys! You guys won't fight me one-on-one. I'm just talking shit, and because I didn't know any other way to be. Now, if we were to sit back, all these years later and look at that, and it's like, oh, what could I say to get the best possible outcome? Could I have been a little bit more compliant? Could I have been a little bit more persuasive? There's always a discussion to be had. But here's something to be said. Here's something that can be said about maintaining a standard exclusive of the scenario you find yourself in. It's an anchor to who one is as an individual. It's an anchor. It is the thing that allows you to stay rooted in function during a storm of stress. In Tribalnomics, I talk about the transcendent alliance and having the transcendent ally. And for the majority of history, that transcendent ally has taken the form of a god or gods. But it could just as functionally be somebody's commitment to a code, to a mantra, to a some sort of an oath, of no matter what happens, I'm not breaking these rules, right? I'm not breaking, if the transcendent alliance is in the form of a relationship with a god or gods or religion, it's not necessarily the rules, but it is the conditions of this alliance to stay in sort of in a good way with this transcendent ally. I'm going to conduct myself in a certain way. And there have been people who have been dying for their beliefs since the beginning of time. Man, at least. The beginning of man. So there is something to be said for the consistency of one's relationship with who they are when they do have the benefit of this anchored transcendent value, this code, and all the forms that that code could take, as I just described. There's something to be said for that. But when you do not have that, you are usually going to succumb to whatever pressure is most significant, or any pressure that transcends the threshold of your aversions. There's a certain point where you get scared for your safety. And to control you, all somebody has to do is legitimately make you that scared. When we believe in things that transcend our fear or aversion to death, then there are those circumstances where we cannot even be threatened with death into compliance. It's a powerful position to be able to have. It's not that it gives you the ability to do something beyond what your capabilities are, but it gives you the ability to maintain your capabilities when lesser men would lose them in order to be compliance based on their aversions. If you don't shoot your mother in the face, I'm going to chop off your leg. If you don't throw your kid off the roof, I'm going to shoot you in the face. It's been nice knowing you. Easy, moral exercises. But I think you guys get the point. We have to have a belief system that transcends the reach of the people that would do us harm. So again, when we look at tyranny, when we look at the tyrants who are looking to convince you to comply, understand the very nature of the power they have is based on your individual deficiency of knowing who you are. What are you willing to stand for? How easy is it to sit you down? The more fragile we are at the individual level, the more potential power a tyrant can wield. That's what they thrive on. A tyrant feeds off of and thrives in the realm of the individuals around them's deficiencies. Cherrytown Vibrates, I get a sense that constant compliance from tyranny births more tyrants. Is this true? Well, understand, whenever we prove a formula to be effective, it incentivizes the use of that formula. This is a universal, the mechanics of these dynamics that transcends this individual application. This is beyond just tyrants. This is for anything. It's the golden rule. Treat everybody the way you would want to be treated. There's something to be said for that. If that is something that works for people, then that you're incentivizing it to be used even more. When we look at the victimization, right, the victimhood currency that's taken a hold of society as of late, and these are things that can only exist in aquariums of surplus, right? We have so much surplus. People are so disconnected from actual surviving, the conflict of dealing with nature. People are so disconnected from that we have the ability to invent new and even more ridiculous ways of getting in our own way, we could say. The reason why people accuse others of racism or sexism or all the random and varied phobias, that people throw around and wield. Like, the reason why people do that is because in this particular society, at this particular time in society, right, the current position of the Overton window, there is currency to be had by doing this. Like, there are people who are walking around with the most preposterous assertions of reality. And because we have created such an incredible value system for victimization, we've disarmed our ability to criticize the ridiculousness that's being traded at a global level these days. understand that there are people who are so, the phrase we used to use for AIDS, I don't know if they still use it for AIDS, but when they say full blown, full blown, there are people nowadays that are sort of full blown pussies. They are like tyrant food. We're not helping these people. These people could always help themselves. People could always, they could have this just spontaneous reaction to a set of circumstances, either some sort of epiphany, some sort of traumatic event. But at an individual level, they could always decide to move themselves in another direction. But that's their thing. As far as we're concerned, we're not going to be able to change those people. So what does that mean? That means that there's going to be people nowadays, and we see this, who will anchor their identity to these nonsensical positions in support of tyranny because they do not have the integrity in the relation of who they are at an individual level to be able to withstand the acknowledgement or the admission that they were wrong. Their identity, their sense of self-worth cannot stand apologizing after they've made a mistake. So what do they have to do? They have to stick to their guns because that's the only way that they get to sleep at night. That's the sort of corner these people have backed themselves into. So why am I even bringing that up? I'm just arguing that's, to try and change these people is a waste of your fucking time. But there are people that are still in transition, in flux, you could say. And these people need to understand that being a tyrant is going to come with consequences. I don't know what those consequences are going to be. I mean, you could buy a shirt if you want, but whatever those tyrants experience after applying those tyrannical formulas is going to determine whether they're more incentivized or more disincentivized to continue using those formulas. What's the best way to deal with a bully? You punch him in the fucking mouth. All of a sudden, those bully formulas take on a completely different take. It's like, oh, I could actually get physically harmed by trying to do this to people. You look at nature when there's competing, sort of dominant, members of groups. Like you see this with apes. They fight until one has an acknowledged edge over the other. They don't fight to the death because they're both trying to walk away from this. It's like, let's just sort out who's what, but let's not go all in. Let's not get emotional about this. Well, that's the thing with a lot of these tyrants. Why are they doing it? Because they can get away with it. Because they haven't suffered enough consequence to threaten their existence. Because they're not going to be in it at that level. They're running a tool that's working. Why wouldn't they run it? All right, guys, we're going to call it there. Mortem Tyrannis, the link to buy the shirt. And I'm into V-necks now because I was born without a neck. I don't think I was born without a neck, but I haven't seen it since puberty. So I'm into these V-necks, but I have regular shirts, tank tops, got some other stuff there. The link is in the description. Check it out. I appreciate you guys. I don't care if you subscribe to the channel. I don't care if you like the video. I don't care if you fucking comment on it. Do whatever you want. I'm here until it becomes, unfulfilling to be here, and then I will not be here. But regardless of what happens in the future, I understand you guys have a limited amount of time, and I'm grateful that you would invest any of it in hanging out with me. As it stands right now, I'll be here next week. Warrior stream, noon Eastern Standard Time. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys then. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.